Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Evagnoni.
bringing you this week's Ascended World. So this week we're playing with the shadow.
We're talking about playing with shadows.
Yeah, we're talking about playing with the shadow, but in essence we are.
I mean, we are whether we realize we are or not.
Right. And that's the point. You know, we came to this realization. Oh, see, I'm already yawning in the past several weeks that it seems like, last year was all about, the house arrest,
Right.
as we accurately predicted unknowingly.
That's
Right.
exactly right.
And the having no distractions to a point where we started having to let that shadow pop its head up to the surface, right?
Right.
And that's where all the fear came from. And we had nothing to distract us. Right? We cut out all of our extracurricular activities. We cut out leaving the house in most cases,
Right. Right.
and then all we were left to do is look in the mirror. Right. And so the thing is how deeply an individual has it incorporated or stuffed down, depended on how long it took for it to come to the surface. Right.
Right. Right.
And it's not a bad thing. We've just judged the shadow as bad because the shadow in itself defines itself as bad because of that's where all these definitions come from, right? We can say the shadow, but in essence it's also the ego. It's the consciousness of what the ego creates. That's what the shadow really is, right?
Right.
In the
Right.
depth of separation.
I mean, we could name it Joe. I mean, it just really doesn't. I mean, the shadow. It's interesting when you think about that because when I'm walking the dogs and it's really hot, I run for the shadows.
Right.
So it's such a relief, and it's such a, oh gosh, this is what I'm searching for. It's just it's that context we give it, and it's that judgment
Yes.
that creates that. But when you go to the beach and you put an umbrella up to create shadow for you
Right.
to sit. I mean,
Right. 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 You're right. And yeah, sometimes when it's convenient, right? And when it's convenient for us, then we love it. Right.
absolutely, absolutely,
But it's what we, so when we think about shadow, it's like, okay, really like when we define it from like consciousness and we look at it from separation and duality, it's that whole me and not me, the perception of me and not me.
right,
It's putting in a partition that is pushing stuff outside, that makes it feel like it's outside of us because we're putting in this partition
right.
saying that this separates.
and
Right.
and it makes it feel like an unknown, or
Right.
like a wild card, an unpredictable,
Right.
which then reinforces that fear
Right.
and
Yeah.
reinforces that hesitation and that judgment of, oh, I should not do this, I should avoid this, or
Well, should, right?
shun. Right. Right.
Should, shouldn't, must,
Right.
must. It's all those, like we said, like we've talked about so many times, the energies and the emotions from the ego, which is the job is to explore separation, right?
Right.
So it's like, well, let's create the shadow and then let's go hide in it, right? Like you're just saying, let's go run from it. Let's run from the light because the light in itself was created in duality as
Right.
well,
Right.
right? So it's for none of us to just fully embrace the light because it's only half of who we are, right?
Right.
In this
Well,
presentation of our
and
consciousness.
it can't exist without the other.
Right.
They're
Right.
they're so defined by each other
Yep.
that you can't have one without the other. Either way.
Yep. And
So
so
you can't.
we get stuck in how do we like, okay, so we get stuck in the consciousness field that we're in, right?
Mm-hmm.
We get stuck in how do I learn in the light? How do I be the light? How do
Right.
I
Right.
be everything. Obviously, that was important because somebody's ringing the doorbell at my
Right.
house.
Either that or trying to distract you from it.
Right? Yeah. Don't look. Don't look.
Don't
So
don't talk about this.
yeah. So the thing is, we say, okay, be in the light, don't like, and then it's like, oh, then we start judging the dark. Then we start judging when we immerse ourselves in the dark. And we get to a place where we are, you know, stomping it down and hiding it, right? Which then gives it more power because then we're pushing it more into separation. We're
Right.
pushing, and so then we're making it more dark. We're making it more,
And more than what it originally was.
right. Yep. And so we've done that and we've wanted to. That was our goal. Like we wanted to explore that creation, that perception, the illusion of all that kind of stuff. But here's the thing, we've lost perception of how it helps us in this part of our consciousness, in this part of our existence.
Well, and something struck me last night, and I'm trying to remember the whole context around it. I'm sure I was thinking about, what had come up through since our conversation on Friday about this topic over the weekend, and about how when we talk about playing with the shadow, immediately, at least from my perspective, and I would think a good portion of the people immediately get a little tense.
Right. Because as soon as when we were talking about it, as soon as I said, because, going back to like last week, I had that meditation where, because I've been doing this. Good morning, Sandra. We've been doing this. I've been doing this exercise on allowing all of the parts of me coming out of the shadows. Right. And so, and allowing them to reassimilate. And so I was in meditation one morning, and bam, I'm on the edge of this playground, and there's this child there. And the child comes up to me and says, "You left me here." Yeah, I know you always make that face. And I said, yeah. And I said, but it's time to change that, and the child didn't say, accept me. The child said, play with me.
Right.
And it wasn't the inner child. It was a facet of some shadow, part of me. And, and so when you and I were talking about, that's where we came to, and I'm like, okay, so maybe, and I tried to, I said, well, let me give you a hug. And it sort of assimilated in, but that wasn't what was needed. Like I could feel there was still something. And then I had this thing come back up, and that I totally like went through that processing on my Thursday podcast on Living the Ship. But then it was like, oh, well, no, it wants to be acknowledged for what it is. And it wants to be played with. Like it's there to help. Right. And then the ego goes, what? Because all you think of is, okay, shadow child on the playground, like, Damien the Omen, what,
Right. But at the same time, when I was feeling into that bit of hesitation and that bit of, oh, but I don't know how to do that, or I don't remember how to do that.
Right.
And then you go, but what if? And then, you start extrapolating into, well, what if I can't control it? What if I tap into this? And what if it's, and you
what
start,
if it takes over,
right. And so in looking at that, it's like, that's exactly why we're here, because that shadow gives us that roller coaster that we so want.
No kidding. And we claim we don't. We claim we hate it.
Right.
Like how many times people go on, including myself, right? I will go on a roller coaster. I will sit in the front row of the roller coaster and I will scream the entire time, and I will go on again. Because I love it, right? That's playing in the shadow, like facing our fears, like facing the things that we put in the shadows. Sometimes that's a game in itself.
Well, and I mean, if you look at for instance, business, the game of, winning, the game of being a success, and it's all riding the roller coaster, and who does it best, who manages it the best, who manipulates it the best.
Oh, I mean, right.
And everybody loves the story of overcoming that, only to find out that you really didn't need to. You had it all along.
Right. It's like, oh, just kidding.
I mean, you could look at that in so many ways. Like, I mean, you've seen those stories where it's like, oh, and it's so heartwarming, and you realize you had it all along, but you never see them turn around and go, I hate this. I hate this. Why did I not know I had it all along?
Well,
Everybody's just happy.
I have had people say that in session though, like, oh, once
Right.
they realize all that, and then they judge themselves, like, why didn't I access this earlier? I mean, you and I have done that sometimes, like,
Well, I'm talking about a movie. I'm
oh,
talking
right,
about
right.
the
No, no, I
movies and
know.
everything, and everybody gets all, ooh, and it's like, no, no, they don't show the reaction of, well, what do you mean I had this all along?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, right?
Right, right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
But along the way, if you think about that, even in that whole Wizard of Oz thing, right? It was such a path of learning, the whole thing,
Which,
right?
yeah, which is exactly what I was just thinking, is that, it changes how you live your life from that point forward. So in looking at the shadow, it's like, look at the value that brought in that whole story, for instance.
Right. Right.
And that, I would think, is what playing with the shadow looks like. We
Mhm.
just convince ourselves that it's not what we want, or undesirable, or to be avoided.
Right. Right. And it's what are we showing ourselves through contrast?
Right.
That's really what the playing in the shadow is. It's what are we showing ourselves through contrast? So we can look at it as dark and scary, or we can just look at it as contrast and reflection. Right. And how much softer that sounds when I say contrast and reflection versus dark and scary. Right.
Right. Right. Well, and I remember, and for some reason this came up over the weekend, which now makes perfect sense, is middle school. And of course, when I went, it was junior high.
Right.
And I had the best art teacher, and I just loved and got the most out of that class, probably any other class in junior high. And I remember one time I was doing a pencil drawing of something, and he came over and he took my pencil in my hand and he started really pushing it hard into the paper. And I was like, and he goes, you have no shadows. You have no depth. You have, and I mean, the drawing just leapt off the page after he did that. But I was so afraid to use that strength
Mm-hmm.
in my drawing. And it was like, holy cow, it's totally different.
Right.
Totally different. And if you look at that from the same perspective we're talking about, so many are afraid of that depth.
Yes.
And it's a commitment to yourself.
Yes. Well, and we've given it so much power over us. We're so afraid of it that we've almost lost that. Yeah, we've lost the depth. We've lost it. And I think that's what last year was saying. Okay, yeah, this isn't working the way we want it to work. We need to reset.
Right. Right.
We've gotten to this level. It's a little too extreme. We've gotten pretty masterful at hiding from this but then unfortunately it still builds up until it explodes. Well, so we create this explosion, yada, yada, yada. But I feel like that's how we got to this. And it's interesting just to sort of tie the point of what we had talked about, leading into doing today's thing, which is so many of us, myself included, you included, almost everybody we know included, have had explosions on the shadow side this year. Right. And how we all deal with them is our choice. Right. But and they're all pertinent. I hit on something, so a month ago or whatever, that it was just such an explosion. And yet it was days into it where I was like, this was perfect. And I could see the perfection, as jarring as it had been for me. I was like, this is freaking awesome. Like, look
Right.
at how this came together
Mm-hmm.
to create the perfect situation to allow all of this stuff to just go bloop right up to the surface. How does it serve? How does it mix together? Take it or
Right.
like all that kind of stuff. And that to me is the gift. Like, that's the gift we get when we allow ourselves to orchestrate it. And it's funny because we talk about, well, what is like, oh, let's not grace and ease, and it's like, but do you know that? Because it can
Right.
always be worse.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Right.
But you and I both have gone through those things. We know many people in our circle have gone through a lot of stuff, and everybody I talk to, it's like, has had a lot of big shifts that have come one way or the other, that have been pushed up, and you could say that they started in the shadows. And it's almost like we have to let it all bloop up so that we can remember how to manage it now in balance with the light,
Right.
so that we get the depth that we desired, right?
And if you think of it as a journey within, if you're only going so deep within yourself, how do you know yourself? How do you experience yourself? How do you see yourself? And it's so shallow and what, two-dimensional. It's
Yeah.
just,
Flat.
yeah, yeah, flat, dull, and it's
Well,
all of that.
it's devoid of the richness we created in the depth of separation here, right? So why are we denying ourselves that
Right.
by denying it,
Right.
right? Because now we judge it. It judges itself, let's just say, right?
Yep.
And so that's this whole, like, so for us to look at it without losing ourselves in it. I had my husband and I had lunch with a couple we know this weekend, and we got into this conversation about the navigation, about the fine line of navigation, which has been like your and my like catchphrase for the past year, is navigating,
Right.
which is
right.
using the GPS of guidance, which is this month's, launched course. And the Wonderland program can still do it. It's self-paced, but using that as your, like, because the person that the one of the people we were having lunch with is very into looking at the big picture of, what many would call conspiracy theory, right?
Right.
But I don't call it conspiracy theory. I just seeing all the motivations and ulterior motives, and how, the realities of how things are really functioning in so many ways that we're just not looking at, right? Because we choose to see things differently, right? Anyway, so the contention that this husband and wife have had is that she was getting too caught up in his theories, right? And she realized that because it was getting her stressed out, and she was like, then all of her actions were based on, oh, well, if this is going to happen, well, then I have to do this. And then she was just losing herself in all that, right? So she finally said, stop. She started working on her stuff, and then she said to him, stop, please. I need to be present. And all of that keeps me from being present and right here, right? And so we were talking about all that, and he's like, well, it's just good to know. And I said, yeah, there's a fine line though. The fine line is looking at all that shadow stuff, looking at all the ego stuff, and not losing yourself in it, right?
Right.
In that wave.
Right.
And that's part of the trick that we're learning to master by allowing the stuff to come up, I think.
And that's that balance, and that applying all that we've learned in seeking the light in seeking the shadow.
Right. Well, when we seek the light, it implies that we're running away from the shadow, right?
Well, and but it's one of those, it's like we have tools, and if we apply those tools equally in every direction, whether it's light or dark or shadow or, whatever words you want to call, it's that same process that we go through, the forgiveness and the gratitude and all the stuff that we've put into our Wonderland program. And it's
Yeah.
like, it applies equally on both sides.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And, you know, the thing I think for us to start, you know, in context of what we're talking about today, the thing that is for us to start asking that we typically don't ask ourselves is, how do I utilize this
Right.
to optimize my bigger picture, to optimize the ultimate results from this set of lessons?
Right. Right. Which is, should be asked on both sides.
Yes. Yep. Yep. And so, and then going back to our forgiveness thing, which, by the way, the forgiveness course is next month, coming around, launching next month in the Wonderland program, and it is refreshed. It's refreshed from the original pilot that we did, and yeah, just incredible stuff. But anyway, not to give us a shameless plug or anything, but the circle of forgiveness, right? Going through the apology, the like, because here's the thing, I saw that child and it was like, I'm sorry I cut you out, you know? And
I mean, and being a child, it's even more, for me at least, it would have been more impressive, the tragedy of being pushed out, left behind, whatever word.
Yeah.
Because it's a child. How could I have done that to a child?
Right.
You know, supposedly an innocent, like puppies and kittens, an animal.
Exactly. I know. And so, and my heart ached, like when I started looking at that, it was like, you know, and then, you know, right away you're like, well, why would I leave this in the shadow? Well, it is a shadow aspect, which is why it was there. Right. So it was like, and I've still yet to get that one completed. I can still feel it toying around and waiting, you know, and I've successfully avoided finishing that because I'm sure there's something still for me to look at, but you know, it's okay. But here's the thing, the avoidance is I'm uncomfortable with that. There's another shadow piece, right? Which means, then why am I uncomfortable with that? Because there's something in the shadows associated with it that I still am like not comfortable looking at. Right. Which means it's very important to look at. So it's tricky for us to start, you know, really seeing these things from this perspective, because we do our best to avoid it, right? We want to make everything feel okay, right?
Right. Don't make waves. And
how much do we do to let everything feel okay, to stomp down discontent, to, you know, not confront, to, you know, like, to allow it to, you know, like push it all down, to like whack-a-mole, push it all down. Right.
Well, and you know, that phrase that I love so much is that, you know, as long as we continue to do that and keep it in the unconscious, we'll always attribute it to fate or bad luck or, you know, karma or whatever.
Yes.
But it will still have an impact on us.
Yep.
And then you get into the whole victim piece.
Yep. I can just feel something in there about that. It's like,
I know.
Like, yep. Let's change the topic. Let's talk about something else now.
Right. Well, I'm very itchy today, so I know that something's messing, you know, pinging.
Yeah, it's like I suddenly can feel sort of mucky stuff in my heart, in my solar plexus, and I'm just like, oh, come on now. I was doing so well this morning.
Right.
But you know, it was funny because when we talked about this on Friday, I was like, oh yeah. Yep, that's the important topic. And then it was like, okay, yeah, we're done. Goodbye. Let's go.
Yeah, we'll let that work over the weekend.
Right. To which I pretty much avoided looking at it most of the weekend. So, you know, but it's, yeah, we all do it. And it's, the key is, and this is what I, you know, was saying at this meal that, or, you know, the lunch that we went to at our friends on Saturdays, the key is observing it versus like losing ourselves in it, right? So it's seeing it for what it is, and it's being in that, like what we've talked about a lot in the past like month, is sitting in it versus pushing through it, right? Or pushing it away. It's just saying, okay, well, what is it? And there's, I know there are many out there, many, who have multiple things that have come up one after the other, right? One after the other, and I mean, this has been the blurping up to the surface stuff, right?
Right.
And at some point, the ego decides it's tired. I'm tired of looking at this. I'm tired of it being in my reality. When is it going to go away? And it's like, well, when you're ready to let it go, right? We also like to play victim to our own emotions and like things that are there,
What if we allowed it with the same guidance and the same restraints or
ambivalence
that we allow the light?
Yeah.
Wow. That would be incredible.
Right. Because the suffering or the tiredness, well, you were talking about being tired, right? Before we get on.
Really tired.
And it comes from a belief that it's a chore, right? Or it's heavier, it's harder, or whatever. And what if we just decided it's just another part of the whole facet,
Right.
Michael says it's like we're on the last leg in this cycle, a lot of tired energy dealing with the shadow. Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, see, I didn't even see that you put that, but yeah.
Well, and before we got on the call, I was like, I've got to figure out this fatigue. I'm just exhausted.
And I've talked to a number of people in the last couple of weeks talking about they have adrenal fatigue.
Right.
All the same.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So it's our choice to let it drag us down. Feel like it's weights, like, because oh my God, I say that and I see like the ankle shackles like dragging the ball behind us, kind of thing.
Ball and chain. Well, and it's, we've probably created it that way to believe that it's a chore.
Mm-hmm.
And that the only way we can come to acceptance of it is by force, because it's become so overwhelming and such a burden that we have no choice but to look at it.
Right.
And I think that's where, when we first started talking about how this is the year of the shadow or the decade, you choose. Because if you choose to allow it to drag on a decade.
Right. That's right. Yeah. That was the other point we wanted to make, is because it's going to come up.
Right.
We've set this up collectively. It's time to let it go, right? Let it come up to the light to help it balance that whole completion of the set of lessons we wanted to do, right? So we've set that as we have opened the gates, and either it's going to take, a week, a month, a year, or a decade, but that's up to us.
Right. And Michael says allowance of the flow of it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because right now it's flowing like lava under the surface. So it's flowing. It's just not flowing productively.
It's seeping up through the cracks.
Right. Or it's creating its own cracks.
So Michael also says, if the shadow is something that's always going to be there, is there some way to negotiate it to be synchronized with where we want to go so it's not dragging us? Yes, absolutely. We can. It's us remembering how to utilize it to our advantage in terms of propelling us, because we create propulsion through the separation and duality here, right? So because we're always going away from something and to something, right? Believing that it's outside of us, right?
Yep.
So when we utilize it consciously, I'm not even sure what that looks like, except it feels so much better to even say it, to say, how do I utilize this consciously, right? In a way that I'm going to enjoy the outcome. I'm going to enjoy the propulsion and enjoy the experience, right? Consciously enjoy, not expanded consciousness enjoy, but actually enjoy it here too.
Right.
Like, how do I wrap myself around that and allow that to happen? And all I would say to start with that is how, like, setting ourselves to have remembrance on how to do that, Maybe that's what
Right.
we do today for our session is
Right. And
how
I believe that having this conversation is a beginning.
yes, absolutely. Yep.
Right.
So that's, again, we came right to the session part, which is, that's what we should, I think what we are to set ourselves for today is how to, like, having clarity, conscious clarity on how to do this, how to play with the shadow, how to utilize it, how to embrace it and trust it, right? We've talked about trusting that in our
Right.
trust course, right?
Yeah.
Which launched last month. And again, anybody can take them anytime, they're self-paced. But anybody, like if we start to trust it, if we start to recognize it as the balance to the light, right? And that its purpose is to create the depth and the propulsion to give us that full, rich, saturated completion of experience.
Right. It's that wholeness. It's that whole
Yeah.
picture. It's that,
Yeah.
it's that.
How do we do it differently so we can do it consciously, right? So we were doing it unconsciously because the nature of the shadow is the unconscious of the, the
Right.
externalization and the duality. But saying, okay, let's shift that. And how do I do that consciously? Like, how do I do it in expanded consciousness for myself from a conscious place where it's balanced and whole and enjoyable and saturated and complete? Oh, that feels really yummy.
Oh, that's great. I feel that. Yeah.
So let's go do that, shall we?
Absolutely.
All right. So everybody was just take a deep breath, close our eyes. That feels good already. Expand our hearts, open our hearts, step out of separation, back into oneness, and we hold ourselves in the vibration where that is our truth. That's from where we exist and create and experience. Okay, so that started out rocky, but then it got so incredibly smooth. It was
Oh,
awesome.
that was amazing. That was amazing. Yeah, I felt I had such clarity, and I'm trying to put it into words on on something, not necessarily a specific, but an emotion like when I feel foolish for having believed something only to find out that it wasn't true, and it's
Mhm.
like from the shadow perspective of looking at, if I don't feel foolish, that's actually a strength. And by constantly focusing on the light or whatever, it doesn't allow that strength to come through. I know that doesn't sum it up really well, but it just was so freeing. I just felt so free from that. I guess I've got to sit with that some more, but it was
Yeah,
definitely around the
I
energy.
definitely need to go back. When we get off, I need to go back and sit with that for a while because I was like,
Yeah,
oh, because I started
incredible.
feeling what it was I had been avoiding with, this weekend. And I was like, oh, um, and then it was just like, oh, but look at how beautiful that, like, it was just so, and it was like, I can't even remember what transitioned it because I was looking at just me, but then it was like this collective thing. And it was like, well, it's like, again, it's adding that other dimension to the hologram, right? And then it's like, oh,
Mhm.
well, then you can see the bigger picture better. And then it was like, it's all play. That's what I got. It's all play.
Right, right,
All of it's play, right? So
right.
then it was like, oh, right. So we shouldn't just take ourselves so seriously. Right.
Exactly. And I guess that was part of what that was a piece of what I was looking at, from feeling as I was being the fool versus I don't have to feel that way. I can just play in all of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just let it be what it is, right?
Right.
Yeah. So then once I sort of let that go, it was like, and that felt just awesome. I was like, okay,
Really,
okay.
really, really felt great there at the end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it did. It did. Oh, all right. Well, everybody, that's our task for the week is
Right.
staying in that, remembering how to play in the shadow as much as the light to allow it to be a whole. Well, think about it. You know what? It's like playing any team sport or anything. If you only have one team, you don't have a game.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, when we start seeing, and then you can't even see the game until you have two teams, right? Because there is
Right.
no game. So when you
Right.
have the two teams, then you can actually watch the game, you can enjoy the game, you can choose how you experience it, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, oh, okay, right. So that's the thing is allowing ourselves to remember how to utilize this in a different way that is really productive and enjoyable and
Expansive.
expansive and adds depth to the whole experience.
Right. Which is why we're here.
Exactly. Yep. We faceted ourselves and faceted ourselves and faceted ourselves again,
Yep.
so we could do this. But all right, guys, thanks for joining us. This is Angela Coulter and
Sarah Sieg Avignon.
signing off with this week's Ascended World. Have a good one.